Mike Macdonald had his first press conference as the Seattle Seahawks head coach today, and I thought it was really, really impressive. If you did not find that incredibly impressive, I don't know what your expectations were. I think he spoke with authority, with real clarity. I think that what's really clear with him is that he's not a big talker, but he's very, very careful with his words, and he can get his point across without wasted words at all. It's a bit different to Pete Carroll, but I think the players are going to really, really appreciate that. You kind of get the point of what he's trying to say in a very, very short sentence. And that is going to do him the power of good when he's trying to communicate what he expects from his players, when he's trying to give them instructions, and just when he's sort of having meetings with the team. Look, I can well imagine that a big old group of players will appreciate a team meeting where the coach just gets to the point. So I think it was really encouraging. He's just got this kind of look in his eye. He just looks and sounds like he was born to do this. And I suppose that's really easy to say when a coach does his first press conference and to say, oh, congratulations, you won the press conference. He's not going to win any football games having a really good opening press conference. And we'll see what his press conferences are like if he has a really difficult period during the season and it becomes very stressful and he's the man at the top as opposed to John Harbaugh or Jim Harbaugh. We'll see how he handles all of that. But this first impression for me was really exciting. I feel really energized from listening to this guy. Just, again, it's easy to say, and maybe in 2 years' time, we'll look back on this video and we'll have a good laugh. But when Ian Rappaport was saying, I've spoken to people around the league and they've compared him to the defensive Sean McVay, which I suppose is a very easy thing to say, probably quite a lazy thing to say. But I kind of got it, listening to him speak today. It doesn't sound like McVay, but there was just something about him. I remember laughing a little bit when like 30-year-old Sean McVay got the Rams job. You were like, what? What are they doing? Like, he's just too young. Like, he's not going to be able to coach the Rams players who were just like 8-8 every year under Jeff Fisher. And then I remember listening to him speak in his opening press conference. You're thinking, this guy could be a problem. He seems to be brilliant. And so it's proved he's a world-class head coach. We will see if Mike Macdonald is equally a world-class head coach. But I thought that was just fantastic. I thought it was fantastic. And look, I've made no secret that over the last few years, I've felt that things have gone stale, or the word that John Schneider used in what I think was a Freudian slip when he did his press conference was that it's stagnant. And that's how it felt to me. And the Seahawks are never going to be horrendous and terrible and top 5 pick under Pete Carroll. But they equally, to me, didn't seem like they were ever going to be, back competing for a Super Bowl. And ultimately, that's what the team felt as well. They've parted ways and they've gone with a new guy. And as much as I wanted to go offensive minded head coach with this appointment, as the options dwindled, I think this is a really, really interesting hire. And no, I'll just all in off the back of that press conference. I think he spoke fantastically well. And this is a really, really encouraging day to be a Seattle Seahawks fan. Now, what I would say is be patient. I do not think that the Seahawks are going to storm the NFC West this year. I think he's going to need some time to reshape the defense. They are going to have to decide what the offense looks like and develop that slightly. They may even draft a quarterback. My expectations for this year are pretty low. And anything more than that will be a pleasant surprise. But when you are building towards something under a new coach and a new vision, and you can say, okay, we're on the start of a journey now, as opposed to a coach who'd got 1 year left on his contract and needed to be sort of winning now because time was of the essence, there's a bit of a difference there. So I think that my message to anybody listening to this who cares what I've got to say is give this guy a couple of years. Don't judge him in 2024. There's something kind of exciting about the way he is. Let's see what he can do with a couple of off seasons under his belt, with working with John Schneider, shaping this defense the way that he will want it to look. And look, he turned the Ravens defense into the 8th best defense in his first year, and then they were first in his second year. It might take 2 seasons to get the Seahawks into a place where Mike Macdonald can go, this is my team now. This is me. You are seeing the product that I always dreamt of creating as a head coach on that football field right now. So yeah, my patience I think is important, not building expectations too high. But yeah, I thought really exciting and just I'm buzzing off the press conference today and the subsequent interviews they did with 710 and KGL. I've listened to them both. Just a very, very impressive individual, and excited to see what happens next. And what happens next is the big thing. Who are his coaches going to be? His coordinators? Who else is going to fill out this staff? I think it was a really good move to keep Carl Scott, who has done a good job with the defensive backs and was quite highly rated. I think keeping him on the team is really important. That's a box filled there. Um, but who's going to be the defensive coordinator and the offensive coordinator? Just to start on the less interesting one, the defensive coordinator, because Mike Macdonald said he's going to call the plays initially, at least. I was really hoping that when Zachary Orr's name started getting mentioned, I think Brady Henderson was the first to chuck it out there. I was thinking, oh, this is a done deal. Like they're a package. He's coming with him. They must be close. And the Ravens sneaked in there and made him their defensive coordinator already and kept him in Baltimore. And I thought that was a very clever move from them. As soon as I saw that report from Brady Henson, I did a bit of digging, went and had a look at some interviews, tried to find out about Zachary Orr's journey through to becoming a coach. It's really inspiring, fantastic speaker. Just like there is something about him that is a bit special as well. I can understand why the Ravens have promoted him to be the defensive coordinator. I can understand why Mike Macdonald probably wanted him in Seattle. And I think they've pulled a clever move because like people have been saying Anthony Weaver could come to Seattle now to be the defensive coordinator, but he's already the assistant head coach. So I'm not even sure if they can request an interview with him. Like that might, I don't think that's a promotion. I think he's already at a level where he's beyond mere defensive coordinator as the assistant head coach. And it was a big deal for him to go back to Baltimore when he made that move to be a coach. And I think it was a big family decision for him. I don't think he's traveling across to the other end of the country to move to Seattle anytime soon. I think he's probably quite settled there. And it will take a head coaching role to get him out of Baltimore. So I think we can forget that one. But by having him as assistant head coach and Zachary Orr as defensive coordinator, you kind of keep both and you don't lose either. And I think they've probably played a good move there. Now the Ravens don't have a big, deep pool of defensive staff. So there's not loads of people you can go down the list and go, okay, Zachary Orr's gone. Let's go and get this guy instead now. So I don't know what Mike Macdonald's going to do there. It's not as important, but it would be nice to have somebody that he trusts, somebody he can work with. He did say that he will call the plays for the first year or two, but he'd quite like to pass that on, the defensive calls, to somebody else so that he can focus on being the head coach. And it would be nice to have somebody in that role who is more than merely just a guy filling the job. It's somebody that it can be developed into someone who can call the plays. And that might have to be from outside Baltimore now. That might have to be somebody who is an impressive position coach, who's a bit of an up and comer himself. I just saw Chris Schuler's been hired as the defensive coordinator in LA when a lot of people thought Brandon Staley would go back there. He was the pass rush coordinator or pass rush specialist / linebackers coach. So can you go and find someone who's done a very good job and as a positional coach, give them a promotion to defensive coordinator, and in the sort of near immediate, get them working very, very well with, like, let's say the linebackers or a defensive line or whatever, because you've got a defensive backs coach with Carl Scott, and then develop them into being somebody who could be a play caller down the road. That could be something. So we'll see what happens there. But the more interesting one is obviously the offensive coordinator. And Ryan Grubb's name popped up. Mike Florio was the first to break that news and saying he was a contender. When he put that out and the wording was, it's not done yet, but I was thinking this is a done deal. They've rung around and they're going to bring him in. And then when I saw Bob Condota and a couple of other journalists, I think who were in Alabama or college football journalists were saying, yep, confirming this. He's in talks. It felt like it was just going to be announced. Like he was maybe flying back to Seattle and they were going to interview him or announce it, and that's it. Ryan Grubb, offensive coordinator. It's not quite that way because it's since emerged that other people are in contention for this. But to talk about it, look, I think Ryan Grubb is very highly rated. When I had my visit to the University of Washington facility before the Apple Cup, the people in that building were effusive in their praise of Ryan Grubb. I had a chance to go into his tape room where they've got this huge, like massive projector screen where you could watch tape, and then 2 treadmills where him and his like right-hand man would run on the treadmill while watching tape. And look, as someone who watches a freaking load of tape without trying to swear, it can be laborious. It can be a bit boring sometimes just to churn through it. You kind of feel your eyes drooping down, falling asleep. It's not the worst idea in the world. I'm more of a weights guy than a treadmill guy, and I've never really enjoyed running. But if you can do that, and by the way, Ryan Grubb's got a set of guns on him, but he obviously does the running as well. And if you can do that and it keeps your sort of mind sharp and you're active while you're watching the tape, fair play to him. I think it's very creative and an innovative way to sort of get through what can be a laborious task sometimes. And like I say, everybody spoke very, very highly of him. And he called plays. He called plays for Kalen DeBoer at Washington and I believe at Fresno State. Now, one of the big problems with going and getting, let's say, a QB's coach or a passing game coordinator who's already in the NFL is the chances are they will never have called plays. And you never know how good somebody is at calling plays until they do the job. You can go and appoint a McVay protege like they did with Shane Waldron. Until they've been there and called plays, I've heard it described as something you can either do or you can't. And until they're in the job, if they can't, then you're wasting time. How long do you give a guy if he just can't do it? Now, with Ryan Grubb, he has done it. So that at the very least, you can watch the Washington tape and make a decision on how good he is as a play caller. So that's not a worry. He's experienced in that regard. It's big. I suppose the offset of that is, and I mentioned this in my article today, I was speaking to very experienced talent evaluator, one of the best in the business, recently, and we got talking about the Washington offense, and he said he had a big problem with it because it was all predetermined that essentially Michael Penix Jr. was told what he's going to do. The example that was mentioned was there was a play against Arizona, apparently, where Michael Penix takes a snap, looks to one side, looks to the right, or whatever, to try and look off a safety or whatever, comes back to the left. His receiver had fallen over while running his route, but because the play pre-snap was you look over to the right and then you come back to the left and throw it, he just threw it anyway. There was no read there. It had all been determined for him. So he threw the ball in the direction of a receiver who was on the turf. That's not a read. And college football is full of that. I mean, anybody's watched those games, you see them all, they're holding the cards up or they're giving him signals or whatever. This is what you've got to do. And the quarterback just goes, okay. And they go up to the line and they execute what they're told to execute. And the NFL is so different. Now, Ryan Grubb has never been in the NFL, unlike Todd Monken, like the Ravens, where Macdonald is from. They bring in Todd Monken from Georgia. He's got like an extensive background in the NFL. He just had a couple of years at Georgia because they went all in to try and get a better coordinator. And they got Monken, and he's gone back to the NFL. So that's a bit different. With Grubb, he's never been in the NFL. So does the Washington offense work in the NFL? We saw Chip Kelly come over and the Oregon offense didn't really work in the NFL at Philadelphia. So whether it translates or not is a question mark. But then I suppose you could equally say a lot of the spread concepts, a lot of the air raid stuff that was in college football has now come into the NFL. So maybe it would work. But look, by all accounts, a very highly rated coach, had a lot of success with Kalen DeBoer, has had play calling experience. I think it's interesting. And Mike Garofalo was on KJR with Puck and Jim, a great show. Check it out. He was saying that there might be multiple candidates in college football who they're talking to. And look, I was told from a source that I trust that there was something in the Chip Kelly, Dan Quinn combo if Dan Quinn got the Seahawks job. Now, maybe Chip Kelly ends up in Washington. Maybe. Now that Dan Quinn's got that job. But if they are, my immediate thought when I heard that was, okay, so Ryan Grubb's one. If there are other people in college football who the Seahawks are interested in, Chip Kelly might be another option. And as we saw with the Boston College head coach, who has now resigned from that role to become the defensive coordinator in Green Bay, there are a whole bunch of coaches, Chip Kelly's one of them, who are sick to death of college football. They hate the fact that every year they have to recruit their own players. They hate the fact they have to go essentially into free agency with no rules thanks to NIL. College football is on the brink of exploding. There needs to be contracts for players. If you're going to take players from teams, they kind of have to be like trades or transfers like you have in English soccer, football. There needs to be something. This cannot carry on the way it is. Nick Saban retired. I'm positive about this because he's sick to death of it. It's going to destroy college football. And when coaches are saying, I don't want to be a head coach in college football anymore, I'll go and be a defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator in the NFL instead. You just wonder who might be interested in a job like this. Yeah, come and run the offense. My Macdonald's going to let you shape it how you want. This isn't like Pete Carroll where you have to come in and run Pete's offense, where he's kind of like, this is what I expect from you. And look, I'm not saying that Pete Carroll controlled everything. He didn't. He did offer like some control to the coordinator as well, but it was still kind of Pete's offense, wasn't it? And I think this is going to be very different. This is going to be more like the modern day. My Macdonald looks after the defensive stuff. The defensive coordinator kind of has the offense as his baby, and that will be appealing to, I would imagine, a lot of coaches. And maybe there are some very good young offensive play callers in college football who might fancy it, who may feel that their stock is better to go to the NFL, be an offensive coordinator, have success, get a head coaching job there, don't have to recruit your own players, you're in the NFL instead of college football. I think it's actually a pretty good tactic to consider. So let's see if there are any other names other than Ryan Grubb who could come into this. And Ryan Grubb, incidentally, has not been named officially the Alabama offensive coordinator. So I don't even know if he's got a contract there yet. So he might be keeping his options open. Might have even heard there was a chance of this and coming back to Seattle. So we'll see if he gets it. But, so I'm thinking at that point, Ryan Grubb's the guy until I see this tweet from um, Albert Breer. And well, I've just seen here there's some breaking news now that Cliff Kingsbury is going to be the new offensive coordinator for the Raiders, which is that is not a great decision. Chip Kelly apparently was in the running for that, according to Ian Rappaport. So the Raiders interviewed Chip Kelly at least twice, says Ian Rappaport. So look, this is kind of, again, he was in college. He was at USC last year. Cliff Kingsbury back in the NFL, but he is a massive mirage for me, and I would not be impressed by that if I was a Raiders fan. So so Albert Breer put out that the Seahawks want to interview the Lions pass game coordinator Tanner Engstrand. Now, when Mike Macdonald was hired, if you watched the stream with Jeff Simmons and I, that was the first name that I mentioned, and I mentioned it in a couple of articles after that. He is somebody that I'm so pleased that they're interviewing, because as someone who wanted initially Ben Johnson to be the head coach, if you can't get Ben Johnson, what's the best way to get the next best things? To get his right-hand man, to bring him in to run the Detroit Lions offense in Seattle. So I've watched interviews with Tanner Engstrand, very bright guy, well-spoken, quite charismatic. Can imagine him being well-liked by players. He's said himself that this was before the season, that he was given a lot of responsibility for the tight ends. We'll look at Sam Laporta's rookie year. And I have no idea whether he is a great play caller or not, because he's never done it. But if he can bring the Detroit offense to Seattle without even having to appoint Ben Johnson, I'm all in for that. They asked so many questions of the Niners in that NFC Championship game and should have won it. And it was nothing to do with Ben Johnson and the play calling or anything like that, or the system that cost them that game. So if you can bring that over, you get the best of both worlds. You get your Mike Macdonald defense and you get your Ben Johnson offense just without Ben Johnson. So I think it's a fantastic idea to interview him. I'm so glad that they're doing it. And I do think that even though some of these guys have never been play callers, I think you do have to remain open-minded. There's guys at the Rams and the Niners who could be the next Bobby Slowick, and I think you've got to try and find that. So really pleased that Tanner Engstrand's getting an interview, and would not be opposed to him being appointed at all. But wow, this is so different. This is so different than Pete Carroll hiring the next guy on his staff, who was next man up. It was always, it was Clint Hurt, Ken Norton, Chris Richard, Dan Quinn came back. It was always like someone being elevated. And it does feel a little bit like a whole new world. Like you've got younger coaches, innovative, creative, exciting. This is what it's all about. So I'm, like I say, energized as a Seahawks fan. And the other thing I want to talk about today in this video is, if it is Ryan Grubb, does it potentially mean that Michael Penix Jr. could come back and people are going to jump to that and some people are going to embrace it and some people are going to say it's lazy or whatever, it's 2 and 2 equals 5. I've already seen people saying, look at Taylor Mays. Everyone thought Carroll was going to draft him, but like, Taylor Mays was crap, and I've got blog archives all the way back to 2008. You have to go on the old site for the Tanner Mays stuff at blogspot.com. But I was never a fan of Tanner Mays and never thought the Seahawks were going to take him in the first round. And they didn't. I didn't think it was any good. And I really liked Earl Thomas. So that was not a surprise to me. But there wasn't as much draft coverage back then as there is now. So people didn't have the access to the tape. YouTube wasn't a big thing. You got hardly any videos. Everyone was basing their opinions on what like Mel Kiper said at the time. Todd McShay was only like bursting onto the scene. There wasn't anybody. Walter Football was basically the de facto analyst for drafts. You go and read his mock drafts that he'd do all the time. There wasn't anything to get your teeth into back then. But well, what little you could glean, I did not think that Taylor Mays was going to be a good player. So I think this is a bit different because I think there are aspects of Michael Penix Jr. And listen, I have done videos about Michael Penix. I have done massive articles about Michael Penix, like 4,000-word articles on Michael Penix. So go and check those out. I'm not going to rehash everything now. I have gone through him, and I've talked about the pros and the cons. I've talked about why he could last around 3 and why he could go in the first round. I think his stock is fluid, but he has an amazing arm. And with Schneider having like Josh Allen and Snyder having like Patrick Mahomes and liked is probably an understatement with those two guys. I think there's at least a chance that he could take Michael Penix Jr. And look, he supposedly was very interested in Andy Dalton in 2011, and Carroll wasn't a big fan of that, apparently. That's what the word on the street was. There's no Carroll getting in the way now, and Penix has elevated his team in the way that Andy Dalton did. He's experienced. He's played a lot of snaps. Obviously, there's the injury history. Obviously, left-handed. There's all sorts of different things like that. If you bring Ryan Grubb in, you know that they're going to have a relationship. It's continuation for the offense that Penix would be in. And like I say, he's got the arm. You will not have to take him at number 16. You could possibly trade down into the back end of the first and take somebody else and if you get back in round 2, I mean, I did a mock draft not that long ago where the Packers trade up for a left tackle. You move back down into the later end of the first round and you might take Penix there, or if you get a second round pick, you could even take him in round 2 and maybe you go and get an offensive defensive lineman yourself at the back end of round 1. I think that is plausible. So yeah, I wouldn't rule that out. I definitely wouldn't rule that out. And when I'm listening to Mike Macdonald, he was asked about Geno Smith today. What do you think of Geno? Well, he's a good player and he's in the Pro Bowl, isn't he? And yeah, we're going to build around a quarterback. And it just seemed all very lukewarm again. It all sounded very like, let's just move that topic along. No point. Carroll would often say, he's our guy. He said that last year. He's our guy. No one has said that. Schneider and Macdonald have been quite lukewarm on Geno Smith. And I don't think there's anything that we're hearing so far that means there's a firm commitment to Geno Smith. Now, whether they cut him, I don't know. I don't know if they can just get rid of him. I think he's perhaps too good to just get rid of. Can they rework his contract, make him a proper bridge, have an out if they do want to move on down the line? They could trade him, but they'd have a very small window to do it. I don't know if you get much in return because you'd be given a full court press by other teams unless there was suddenly a bidding market or bidding war. But maybe there would be some teams who would be interested in doing that. Atlanta, for example, might want to do that. You could well imagine him there with Raheem Morris and Zach Robinson. So I don't know, but I don't think there's a big firm commitment to Geno Smith. I think they are going to draft a quarterback this year or next. I think that's going to be the direct. I think it is going to be younger. It is going to be new. It is going to be a different direction under John Schneider and Macdonald. And yeah, that whether that means drafting a quarterback this year or waiting for, say, Quinn Ewers in a year, I'm not sure. I just wish they had that second round pick because I'm watching the Senior Bowl. I've got a whole bunch of 3 days worth of notes now. There's a whole bunch of offensive linemen, defensive linemen who are very, very interesting. I know that there's going to be one that goes in the second round when Seattle's picking, and unless they re-sign Leonard Williams, I'm going to be throwing stuff at the screen on draft day that they don't have that second round pick. So they better re-sign Leonard Williams, who I like and would like to see stay in Seattle. But they better keep him because if they just had him for 10 games and blew a second round pick because of that, that would be unforgivable. And if that was Pete Carroll's decision rather than John Schneider's, he deserves a kick up the arse for that. So, but we'll never know. It might, maybe they both agreed on it. I don't know. But if Carroll thought he was on the way out, here's our chance to go out on a high, and they just spaffed the second round pick down the drain, then that would be very, very frustrating. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Were you as impressed with Mike Macdonald as I was in the press conference? Let me know in the comments section. Who do you want as offensive coordinator? What do you think of Ryan Grubb? What do you think of Tanner Engstrom potentially coming in? I like both of the options. What do you think? Is it still possible that Chip Kelly could come in? Is there somebody else in college football that you like? Is there another name out there that you think is worth considering? What about the defensive coordinator role? And what do you think about what I was talking there about quarterbacks and stuff like that? Because I don't think Geno Smith's the problem. And people mistake sort of any kind of talk about Geno Smith as that he's no good and he's the problem and they need to get rid of him. It's not that. It's he's 34 this year. And this is John Schneider's time. And it's a new young coach. It's resetting everything. It's not Pete Carroll in the last dying days of his career. This is like new coach, youngest coach in the league, long-term plan. This is exactly the kind of time when you would draft a quarterback and grow with that quarterback as you build the team. I accept there's still a lot to do on the defense, and there's a lot of good defensive players who I think would they look like Ravens, therefore they look like Seahawks now. So I think there's a lot of good options there. And when the Senior Bowl is done, new horizontal board coming out, updated, some big changes to that. New mock draft will be coming out. Might do a sort of like a Seahawks 3-round mock draft to go with the 2-round mock draft. So stay tuned for that. There's going to be some big changes to the last mock. So lots to look forward to. SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis. Make sure you subscribe to the video, to the channel, so you don't miss any videos. Hit the notification bell so that you get notified when we're doing live streams or any new videos out. Like the video. That's a big help. Leave a comment in the comment section. That's a big help as well. Until next time, bye for now.